Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be here today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, we are honored to welcome two remarkable guests, Max Mayblum, the founder and CEO of Givers, and Katie Wilkinson, the Director of Marketing at Givers. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. So let's start off with kind of giving an overview of what Givers is. I think this is a remarkable initiative and platform that you guys have created and are doing, but a lot of our viewers may not be familiar with it. So if one of you would like to kind of start and just give us a little background on it, Max, if you want to take that question and just give us a little more insight into what Givers is and kind of how it functions.
Yeah, happy to. And just by way of background, I started Givers in 2021 after going through my own family caregiving experience. I was really deep in digital health, and my family, our caregiving situation got more and more intense, as with so many other families during COVID. Right. And it really woke me up to the realities of how difficult navigating family caregiving is. And I thought, as someone in digital health, I'd be able to help my family through it. And what I realized is there's a pretty broken and difficult system to work your way through, not least of all financially. Right. And especially as we enter, a difficult time in the economy, people are making the most of every penny. And so it really woke me up to the fact that we need to support caregivers financially, and that we don't have a system built for what's happening in our society and healthcare system today. So Givers is really on a mission to build the financial infrastructure for family caregivers. We're building a product that can help family caregivers find more financial security. So thinking about the systems that they've built in their own home, whether it's spreadsheets or keeping receipts, helping them digitize that and make it easier. And then also finding savings through tax credits, some partners in our affiliate marketplace, and other savings opportunities along the way.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that real quick, and you probably know some of these statistics as well, but nearly 17% of the U.S. adult population provides unpaid care for an adult over the age of 50. I think that number is probably significantly lower, because we have found a lot of times a family member or a neighbor or a friend, they don't identify as a caregiver. They're just, I'm helping out, or I'm doing this and I'm doing that. But in reality, that's part of being a caregiver. And another really shocking statistic is that of those unpaid caregivers, they spend on average $7,000 of their own money to be able to provide that care, whatever the need may be, to that individual. And this was from an ARP research study that came out. But Goyers has said, we think that financial number is significantly higher because, again, I'm just picking up breakfast for dad, But if dad can't make his food and has no other means to get breakfast, that's being a caregiver by providing that meal. It's different than if you and I just went out to lunch and I said, you know what, Max, I'm going to get it this time. You can get it next time. Versus I need to go drop off breakfast for my mom or my dad. And there's such a significant toll. And it's not, one of the things I find is when a person is an unpaid caregiver, family caregiver, friend caregiver, and they're not identifying as a caregiver, and slowly those needs become gradually increased. Now it's not just the emotional and physical and the toll it takes on your time, but there's that financial aspect to it as well. You have to go from full-time to part-time. Did you lose your benefits when you took that reduced role? There's so many things that play into really the full spectrum of our economic system in America, right?
Completely agree. I think, the statistics that we've heard, around 53 million Americans taking care of their loved ones and on average spending over $7,000 a year. I agree with you. I think they're understated. First of all, those studies happened before COVID, right? And we know COVID has changed the game for caregiving. And the other thing I would add is I'd say a huge swath of or hidden costs that caregivers are really taking on, whether it's losing work or stepping back from work or giving up vacation time or sacrificing some of their own physical or mental health, which brings on an additional layer of cost for caregivers. It's really takes a large toll on everyone's life.
Yeah. And, one last thing I wanted to mention, then I wanted to go to you, Katie. When you look at the breakdown too, 70% of unpaid caregivers are typically the females. And those females, they say, provide on average more time or as much time of unpaid caregiving to a loved one or a family member as they would in a full-time paid position with a job. So, I mean, that really kind of puts it into perspective, the significance. It isn't just picking up breakfast for dad, like my example. You're there full-time. It could be the bathing, grooming, toileting, getting them to and from doctor's appointments. And like you've already mentioned, Max, it's a significant hole or break in the system where it's affecting a trickle-down effect to everybody, right? So that person has to leave their full-time job. Now you have an open position at your company. Now you got to spend money as the employer to hire for that. I mean, it's just a vicious cycle, and there really is very little to, if any, support for these unpaid caregivers. And so this is where Givers kind of springs from, correct?
Yeah, and I would echo what you're saying, which is I think caregiving is more than just a healthcare issue. It's an economic issue. This is a workforce issue. We've seen over the past couple of decades really incredible progress in the workplace, bringing women into leadership roles and helping support their careers. But we haven't seen that same sort of progress at home and in legislation to recognize the value of and support women who are taking on caregiving responsibilities. And so that mismatch is really what's causing some difficulties in the workforce, especially as we see the labor market be so tight. So one of the things we want to do in our mission of Givers is really helping people tap into those resources that are available at the federal and state level to be able to find that financial freedom and maybe some breathing room to get back into the workforce, to get involved. Or if they make the decision to go and spend, full time with their loved one, they should be able to do so, not at a financial cost.
Yeah, well, it's almost in some ways, not to make an exact comparison, but in some ways they need almost something like a maternity leave for caregivers, right? Where, now more and more employers are offering extended maternity leave, not only for females, but also for males. Some employers are now offering on-site or paid daycare for their employees who have children. So, but that was a slow progress. That a lot of that wasn't there even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And now with the increased aging of our baby boomer population, you're almost having the reverse effect. Now you need to have those support services for the adult children who are now having to provide care for an aging parent. Or again, going to the economical toll, that parent's left without care. So now there's more trips to the doctors. They're dealing with more health issues. They're not taking their medications, doing their exercises, and so forth and so on. So now they might end up into a nursing facility. The nursing facility, the parent can't pay for it. So now you're looking at enrolling them into Medicaid, which then is, an expense on the state level. And then you have the Medicare level for federal. So it really is quite a epidemic, I call it, right, for unpaid caregivers. And so you guys are trying to kind of change the tide with Givers, which, reading about it and learning more about it is just a remarkable program. And I want to ask Katie a question, but I also want to ask you both in a little bit, what kind of feedback are you getting from either professional partners or organizations, but also from the unpaid caregivers who have found you guys and are taking advantage of this program? But first, I want to ask Katie, walk us through, Katie, we've kind of been talking about it, but really what what you provide to the family caregivers from Givers. There's some financial benefit, but you want to kind of explain some of that?
Yeah, I'm happy to share a bit more about what we do. Specifically, Max talked about why we do what we do and the catalyst for Givers, but happy to share a bit about what we actually do right now. So like Max mentioned, we are a savings and support platform for unpaid family caregivers, and we're building financial infrastructure for family caregivers to better save and better manage their money. We are very excited, and I think Max will talk a bit later about where we're headed and what's the future for Givers. But right now, we've got a really great foundation for tools that caregivers can use to start to save and manage their money. The first is the Givers debit card, which is a self-funded debit card that caregivers can use to silo all of their care expenses and track their care expenses in one place, and give them a better financial picture of what actual cost what are they actually spending on their caregiving expenses. And a future piece of that is to include families or friends or people that are in sort of the circle of care, to also contribute to this. Contribute's not the right word, but collaborate on the expenses of caregiving.
Sure.
One way that caregivers can save money with us right now is through the Givers Marketplace, which is a catalog of products and services that can help caregivers, and they can get an exclusive discount as a Givers member. It's free to be a Givers member, and then they get access to these discounts. Right now, it's just a full catalog. We're excited in the future to make it a really curated experience. So if someone is caring for their mom with dementia or their husband with ALS, they can log into the marketplace and get, recommendations or suggestions of products for them there. And then third right now is Givers Taxes, which is an online tax filing system. It is maybe similar to something like TurboTax, but what we're doing in that is really highlighting and streamlining opportunities for you to, what am I trying to say? Get your tax credits that you might be eligible for as a caregiver. So like the child independent tax credit, these might get missed on something like TurboTax, or CPA might miss it. Through Givers Taxes, these are highlighted and made sure that you don't miss tax credits or deductions that you might be eligible for.
Do you know the cost offhand, Katie, for somebody that might want to use that on Givers for the tax services?
Yep, it's $40 for anyone to use. If you're a Givers member, the cost drops down to $20. It's just a flat fee.
Okay, great. So what is your experience? I know, Max was sharing a little bit of his, and we'll let him, elaborate on that. But what is your background, and what drew you to the mission of Givers and the work you're doing?
Yeah, I feel very connected to our mission. It's why I'm here. My mom was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer back in 2012, I think. I was living in Toronto. My family's in California. And my dad was her primary caregiver. I was supporting the best I could from afar, and I don't think I did a great job, but I definitely watched him take care of her and the toll that it took on him and really our family at large. There's a lot of research around, substance use disorder in family caregivers. I watched that firsthand. My dad had a substance use disorder after taking care of her from all of the many stressors, and I became his caregiver temporarily as he went through rehab and recovery. And I think addiction has a stigma in many ways, but it is a disorder. And I cared for him through that recovery. So I feel very connected to our mission. And, went through my own experience as a caregiver for my dad and experienced the same, physical and mental stressors, and can see how this cycle continues. And so I'm excited about what we're building because I feel very connected to it. And Max has a different story about caregiving in his family, and I'm sure you're happy to share about that.
Yeah, happy to. And I think, Katie, your story is it echoes so much of why we're doing this, because every story really definitely is unique. Right. I think every family goes through their own difficulties, but as we saw with your dad's story, the stress of caregiving obviously then led to other issues in his life, which led to other costs in the healthcare system, other difficulties for the family. And had he had some more support surrounding him while he was caring for your mom, I feel like, maybe he would have been able to avoid some of those issues. And so I think that's such a motivator for us, is to really think about how every family is uniquely impacted by caregiving, and how it can make it a little bit easier for them. And for me, my family went through a personal story as well. My aunt was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer during COVID. I had moved in with my family out of New York City so I could be closer to them and see how I can help. And really what I saw was just the stress level in my house rise up exponentially as we were thinking about finding the best treatment, how we were going to afford care. At the same time, my grandparents were dealing with isolation from COVID. And so this confluence of changes in my family, which I think so many caregivers go through, is this really sort of sudden and immediate change in stress and need, awakened me to how difficult caregiving is. And then the big picture that I started to understand is that nursing homes are exorbitantly expensive. There's a labor shortage for in-home care. And so family members are just taking on more and more of this burden, especially as we sort of continue to see the baby boomers age.
Right.
And family caregivers are going to have to do more work. And that's why we want to build infrastructure for them.
That's wonderful. Let's talk about some of those financial costs, Max. What are the type of financial impacts that you're seeing families undertake being caregivers, unpaid caregivers, and what do you think? What are they mostly spending their money on? Is it supplies? Is it food? Or is it just a combination of all the above?
Yeah, I would break down expenses into really three buckets. The first bucket is probably the largest one, and I would call those home costs, whether that means rent or home improvements or household expenses. There's a lot that goes into making sure your family member is housed correctly and put in a situation where they can feel safe and feel supported. So home costs is the first big bucket. The next would be medical expenses. We see a lot of family members through different data sources taking on those medical costs, whether it's clinical care or otherwise, on behalf of their family members. And then the third would be personal expenses, whether it's for the care recipient, their loved one who they're taking care of, or themselves. There's a huge sort of bucket of costs with incontinence supplies or transportation and gas that really continue to weigh on the wallet of caregivers. So from an expense perspective, those are the three buckets. The other financial impacts that we know people take on is, generally speaking, 33% of caregivers reduce or lose their income. So not only are they spending more money, they're making less money. And then what happens as a result of that? We see that 45% of caregivers have taken on debt to afford caregiving. So that's double since 2020's AARP study, which they found 23% of caregivers were taking on debt.
Mm-hmm. It's incredible when you really stop and look at it. And I don't know about for the two of you, before your experiences kind of being drawn into being a family caregiver, would you have had any idea? Right. Yeah. And that's the thing. And I think that's why it's so hard for this topic and this issue to really get the attention that it deserves. Because if it's not affecting you, you don't think about it. You know, we've had so many guests on who say, you know, you're not growing up planning to be a caregiver at any time. That's not on the forefront of your mind at any time. But then one day you wake up and all of a sudden you are a family caregiver. And now you're scrambling. What do I do? Where do I go? Where do I turn to? And that's, you know, hopefully with Givers is bringing more attention to this really needed subject. Have you noticed any feedback from any organizations? I'm sure you're getting a lot of platitudes for really shining a light on this issue.
Definitely. And I think you're pointing out such a good point, which is the people who know it very well, and they really feel this. And one organization where we've been fortunate to get close with is the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers. Yeah. And, you know, what you're saying about people not knowing it until they really wake up to the fact that they're a caregiver reminds me of that Rosalind Carter quote, which is that there's four types of people in this world. It's people who've been caregivers, who are currently caregivers, who will be caregivers, or who will need caregivers, right? Absolutely. So it impacts you when it impacts you. And when you wake up to that reality, it's a difficult one. But what I've found to be so sort of exciting and inspiring is there have been institutions and companies working on this problem for decades now. And as we continue to shine spotlight onto the caregiving crisis that our country is in, I think that we're really working our way towards a meaningful change and some meaningful impact for caregivers.
That's fantastic. Katie, why do you think it is so difficult for families to discuss finances within the family? Does that go back to, you know, the parent having a more older school mentality, pride, independence? It's none of your business, that kind of thing? Or
yeah, all of the above.
All of the above, yeah.
I think like studies show that people have a harder time talking about money and finance than they do about other stuff like politics or death or religion, which is, you know, all of these are kind of taboo, but finances and money take the top of that list of things that are hard to talk about. And I think that it has to do with what you've just mentioned. It's like being out of practice, and probably a little bit like if we don't talk about it, it's not really there. And I think this is especially true for families that where money is tighter and they don't have adequate resources or income to manage hardships like, I was going to say hardships like caregiving. I don't know if that's totally fair in all situations,
Sure.
but for many families, it can be a hardship. I think there's also a tendency to only talk about money when a problem arises. All of a sudden now we have a thing that we need to talk about, and oh shoot, it's chaotic, and now we should talk about what we're going to do about this financial situation. I think it can become easier if we get into the practice of talking about money more regularly, and that's not necessarily sharing dollar amounts with each other or like
Right.
opening our bank accounts to each other, but just generally talking about, my budget this month, or this tip that I learned, like bringing finances and money into the conversation more regularly, especially when you're young, like making it a regular conversation that's okay to talk about at the dinner table, I think makes it less awkward. When we have to talk about bigger things, like how are we going to pay for mom's, assisted living facility? I do think, and you touched on this a little bit also, that I think we'll see a generational shift. I think younger generations, millennials and younger, feel less embarrassed to talk about money than our older generations.
Yeah. Well, and I think it also opens up two sets of issues, right? One is getting the parent to open up about the finances. And if they do open up about the finances, then if there's siblings involved, the siblings may have different ideas about how the money should be spent or utilized. That creates a whole nother set of issues. And ultimately, a lot of that can be avoided at times if you have power of attorneys, right? And that power of attorney can just monitor the finances and the estate to make sure things are in order, to have an idea of what's there and what can be utilized as far as resources go. But yeah, it's one of those conversations, never ask somebody how much they make, don't ask them what their religion, it's those taboo issues that, there's a time that those are appropriate, but when it's within a family, and it's just for the care and support of that family member, the taboo, in my opinion, kind of is out the window, right? Because you need to know what you're working with so that you can adequately take care of that person.
Yeah. And I'd love to have, Lance, I think you bring up a really interesting distinction, which is we've got this cultural issue about having conversations around finances. And then on the other piece, I think on the other side, I think there's a piece around tools and systems for having these conversations. And you brought up power of attorney, right? So that's one system that we've had in our banking infrastructure and our legal infrastructure that really opens up those conversations. And then if you think about how technology has changed conversations, Venmo has made it less awkward for us to ask our friends to reimburse us for things, or it used to be difficult to, do a fundraising, and now you've got GoFundMe. And so I think as we think about building givers, those are some of the tools that we're really excited about building, which is how do we make these conversations easier to have?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Normalize it, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So Mac, let's talk about financial support. What type of financial support is available for family caregivers, and why should we compensate them?
Yeah. So one thing I learned really quickly as I was looking for my own family and in research for other caregivers as to what financial support is available is that there are billions of dollars out there, but they're in a disparate, complex system that can lock people out of the money that they're eligible for. And so whether it's at the federal level with tax credits and people not recognizing that they can claim their loved one as a dependent and earn some tax credits every year for that, or if it's through the VA and veteran compensation for taking care of a veteran, or at the state level where there's local grants. Arizona, for example, reimburses caregivers up to $1,000 of home improvement costs. So what I realized is there's a map of opportunities across this entire country. And what we don't have or are limited on as family caregivers is the time and energy to navigate our way through those. And so that's what we're really trying to step in to do is how do we streamline the process to finding out what you're eligible for, and then take you a step further and actually going through that complex paperwork and making it simple for you.
Right. And that's the thing too. If you're a family caregiver and let's say you're in, your middle ages and maybe you're not as tech savvy and things are a little more complicated because you're not experienced or well versed with certain terms or procedures, that can be overwhelming in and of itself, where you just get fed up and say, I don't have the time to add more stress and worry on my plate. I'm just going to skip it and keep going about the way I've been doing it, which is not a good attitude to have, but I can understand that attitude, right? So Katie, what have you learned with your interactions, being the head of marketing and things? You've probably talked to countless caregivers and families. What are some things you're hearing from them as far as the work Givers has done for them or the support that Givers has offered them?
Sure. I mean, I think you know this also from talking to, caregivers day in and day out, but no situation, no two situations is the same. Everyone's situation is unique to them. But I think a commonality that we see in our community of caregivers is that everyone's looking for the commonality is that people feel lonely and they're looking for community and they're looking for some level of guidance. I think that's what they're looking for in community, is people who get it and people who have been there before them and they're looking for some guidance. I think one of you just mentioned it, but there's limited time and energy to navigate the complexities of caregiving. There's so much to do already just being a caregiver, that managing the rest of it, the paperwork and the finances and all of this is extra on top of it. And so I think probably the thing that I've noticed the most from interacting with caregivers in our community is that no situation is the same. Everyone's looking for community and guidance. And I think I'm particularly excited about what we're building at Givers to hopefully alleviate that for people, especially as they start their caregiving journey and don't know where to start. They get thrown in. They're saying, oh no, what am I doing? Right. I'm excited for a tool to exist where people go, we turn to Givers for our financial support as a caregiver.
That's tremendous. Max, one thing that really stood out to me when researching for this conversation with you guys was that last year, Givers had conducted the largest scale national survey for family caregivers since 2020 from the AARP. And it says you found some really dramatic differences and changes since that last major survey from the AARP in 2020. Can you talk about some of those findings that you guys came up with, and how much, and I kind of think I know the answer, but how much of a role did COVID play in these results versus the one that the AARP had done?
Yeah, I think you're nailing it on the head, which is this AARP's last study was before COVID. And so we were really interested to get close to caregivers post-COVID to hear what life has been like. And what we learned was, unfortunately, not surprising, but pretty extreme. 1 in 3 family caregivers plan to take on their caregiving role before the pandemic. So the pandemic really thrust a large amount of people into a caregiving situation. And what we found of those caregivers was pretty significant stress and difficult situations that they're in. 50% of caregivers lived with their loved ones, which is up from 34% in 2015 and 40% in 2020. So caregivers are really getting into the homes of their loved ones now. And that may be a sign of either how intense their caregiving situation is or how difficult their financial situation is, as a way to alleviate some of the costs that they're taking on. The other thing that I would highlight is 45% of caregivers in our survey reported being financially strained, which was up from 18% in 2020. So wow. The statistics have more than doubled around financial strain and some of the difficulties people are going through. And I would say, just most broadly, as a sign of how significant caregiving is in people's lives, we asked people, does caregiving fall in the top 3 issues for you that your family is facing? And 2 out of 3 caregivers said yes. So when you think about, inflation and politics and school and investing, there's so many different things that families are focused on. And those who are taking care of a loved one, caregiving is one of the biggest issues they face.
Wow. Just curious, how often do you plan on doing a survey of that magnitude?
Oh, we want to do it every year. We think it'd be really great to make sure we're shining a light on what caregivers are facing. And over time, especially as more and more caregivers use their giver's card to spend on caregiving related items, we're excited to be able to leverage some really proprietary data in an aggregated and anonymized sense to have a nice lens into what's changed over the year for caregivers. What are they spending on? How have things looked different from where the year began, et cetera?
I think it'd be interesting to survey that caregiver before they get enrolled to Givers, and then survey them a year after they've been in the program to compare and analyze their results that way too.
Of course. Yeah. We have a very strong hypothesis that being able to relieve people's financial stress will also drive other outcomes that are positive for the
Sure.
healthcare system and the economy. And those are things that we're definitely excited to measure.
That's exciting. Very exciting. What other types of impacts do you think family caregivers face while they're caring for their loved ones? And I know we've kind of probably touched on most of them, but do you want to dig down deep on any of that?
Well, I would say we've talked about the financial bucket. I think the two other buckets that are really important are physical health and mental health. And I'll just say at a high level, we know from a physical health perspective, people who face financial stress are 2 times more likely to have, worse physical health outcomes. And so financial stress really filters its way through into your entire life. And then I think most devastatingly, a study done by the government during COVID found that caregivers were 3 times more likely to have suicidal ideations than non-caregivers. So the mental stress of taking on caring for a loved one and all the anxiety and difficulties that may come with that, along with and compounded by financial stress and physical health stress, can create a mental health issue that is so widespread in this country. We need to look at all 3 of these pieces holistically to figure out how we can solve it.
Absolutely. Katie, what's a way, or how do you perceive family caregivers playing a larger role in their care team?
Yeah, I think Max just touched on it, and I shared a little bit about my personal story, but it took, as probably every caregiver in the world knows, but it took a large, physical toll and mental health toll and financial toll. In my experience, I saw a stat recently that said nearly 2 in 5 caregivers have a chronic disease or illness, which is staggering. And I fall into that bucket. So the stat resonates. All of this to say, I think maybe my piece of advice or my insight into this is for families to get involved sooner. Again, I'm excited about ways that Givers is building ways for families to do that financially. But I think also there's ways to get involved in being your care recipient's care team that may not be the same way that the primary caregiver is. You might not have power of attorney, but it takes all kinds. I think two things. There's some level of pride in being the primary caregiver, and you don't want to ask for help or ask for money or ask for this because it feels weird. And then I think the other bit is that families don't want to step on toes. They don't get involved sooner. And then you end up in this sort of cycle where the primary caregiver now feels like, well, I've kind of got this control over the situation. I know all the details and I have all the paperwork, and it's too exhausting to even invite you into it now. So I'll just take care of it. Leads to burnout. Now we're in a cycle. I think there's ways that other family members or friends can get involved in being part of the care team that can be really simple, like helping with errands or household chores, offering to babysit or arranging respite care, just listening. That's, silly, but call your friend and just listen to them. And I think all of this is true for long distance caregivers also. I mentioned I was in Toronto while my dad was taking care of my mom in California. I don't think I did an excellent job at the time in supporting him, but I think there's things you can do from afar, like arranging a housekeeper or helping to, automate bills. I think you can still support the primary caregiver even if you're at a distance.
Yeah, that's great advice. Max, what's on the horizon for Givers in 2023?
I'm really excited about what's to come for us this year. First and foremost, we're engaging directly with the caregiver, and we're building a direct-to-consumer product so people can find us online, just searching us out, or through social media advertising, however they may find us. And what we're focused on is really getting close to how they're using our product and how we can better serve them so we can build something that's really valuable to them and that they love engaging with. And then the second piece of, as we look forward into the next year and the next 12 months, we talked about some of those economic and healthcare impacts of caregivers. And so one thing we're excited about is, as we build a platform for engaging with family caregivers, how can we work with value-aligned organizations, whether it's Medicare Advantage plans or employers, who really see that need and desire to make a connection with the family caregiver and support them? And how can we be a vehicle for those connections?
That's exciting. And how about in 5 years?
Oh, well, over the next 5 years, we want to be the destination for any programs that are being launched to help family caregivers. So as we build the banking infrastructure and the ability for family caregivers to recognize if they're eligible for a program, we want states to come to us and think of Givers as the place to actually build those programs, identify who's eligible, and be able to distribute that money that they've already allocated to make an impact.
That's remarkable. I want to ask both of you, and you may each have one, or maybe just one of you do. Is there one specific caregiver through Givers who has given you any feedback or a story that has really resonated and has stood out above others? That is that top of mind for you?
I'm happy to say one, which is my parents. They love Givers. They're excited about the mission, and that's what I built. The reason I built this company was I was building solutions for my own family, and I thought about how can I extend these solutions to all of the caregivers around the country. So just trying to make mom and dad proud.
And I'm sure they are, Max. And you know what? A lot of the best ideas originate from doing it for a family or for a personal reason and then sharing it with everyone else to benefit from. So, kudos to you guys. Katie, I'm going to ask you, but before I ask, I want to mention we're going to have the links and all the information for Givers on our website and in our show notes and on the video here on the screen. But where can people find Givers online if they want to learn more?
Yep, we're at joingivers.com. That's our website. And we're at Join Givers across all social channels. So LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, at Join Givers. We also have a podcast called Cost of Caring that people can find across their streaming platforms.
Okay.
And it is just conversations about the hidden costs of caregiving, specifically financially, but also like we've talked about, emotionally, mentally, physically. We're sharing people's stories and hopefully taking some of the taboo out of talking about finances.
And I hope you guys do. And I hope, if we can ever be of any help or support to the work you're doing at Givers, we'd be very honored and privileged to, because this is something very near and dear to our hearts here, because we come into contact with countless families, and that's the biggest issue. Is they are just kind of at the end of their rope, so to speak, and they can't go on. It's either they're getting too much pushback from a sibling who, lives in another state and said, I just called mom and she said everything's fine. But, on the ground here, the daughter or the son is saying that's not the reality. One quick story before I thank you guys for your time today. A family we were helping just a couple days a week, the daughter was kind of in some denial. And we kept saying, we're getting feedback from our case managers and from our staff that maybe mom needs just a little more help than the 2 days that we're going to visit her. And the daughter thought everything was fine. And then the mom ended up having a horrific fall and ended up in the ICU. And it was just a bad situation. And this wasn't when our staff was there. And when we met with the daughter, she was just in complete disarray. She ended up, while her mom is hospitalized, she's getting the mail, and that her house got tagged, and they found out mom hadn't paid the property taxes in over 2 years, and they're getting ready to come and repossess the property to the tax assessor's office for failure to pay taxes. But the daughter had already, she's raising her kids. She has a full-time job. She lives, 45 minutes away or so, and she'd pop in and see mom once or twice a week, call, but it's all very superficial. She was still in denial that mom had anything truly wrong with her. So she wasn't monitoring her finances, wasn't making sure, the electric bill was being paid. We were helping with that, but the taxes was a totally separate issue. And she just could not believe it when that time came. And she said, what am I supposed to do? I can't afford to have a company with her 24/7. I can't afford to lose my job and take care of her. And my brother, who lived, 8 states away, he can't move her into his house, and we don't, it snowballs, right? So, right there, that one situation, she's looking at her job, her living environment, all these different things. And, she just didn't have the support readily available that could help with that situation, and so, but that's just one story out of millions, right? That are going through maybe not the exact circumstance, but similar situations where we're not truly aware what's going on behind the scenes sometimes with our parents or our loved ones, because we're just seeing the outside surface. Mom looks good, somebody's helping her a couple days a week, And it, sadly had taken their mother falling down the stairs at her home and a neighbor discovering her to really open up that dialogue, because they never had that dialogue like we were talking about, having that conversation about finances and, even to what the wishes are in the event you do need more help. What do you want to do? Do you want to have help in the home? Do you want to go to a facility? And so I just think you guys are leading the way in advocacy for these conversations and to support these caregivers. And any way we can help, we'd be happy to. And I just thank you both so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you, Lance.
Yeah, thanks, Lance. This was awesome.
You're very welcome. Best of luck to you guys. And hopefully we'll talk again in the future. Maybe next year we can talk about the new survey.
Absolutely.
Sounds like a plan.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also like to say thank you again to Max and Katie for visiting with us today and sharing the incredible work that Givers is doing to help family caregivers. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next time here at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.